Good evening, everyone. At least it's evening for me while I'm recording this mini lecture from my kitchen table. I am moving topics now, moving over from whether federalism is good or bad, and I gave you three advantages and three disadvantages of federalism in the last two mini lectures. One of the things that I find deficient in most textbooks and even when I've observed some of my colleagues teach federalism, it is almost always taught as kind of a stale legal or constitutional doctrine. And certainly there are important constitutional issues and debates, but I think there is also a human side to federalism, and I believe that this is the side that is often ignored in political science classes. And so I told you in the last mini lecture, I would tell you my connection to Daniel Elazar, and this whole page on political culture is essentially stolen from him. Elazar became prominent and rather famous because he didn't find the political culture literature very satisfactory. There had been a lot of political scientists who had made the claim that there were national political cultures, that there was an English culture, a German culture, a Mexican culture. And Elazar said that he didn't believe that the notion of one American political culture was very convincing. Elazar had been throughout the country and found that political culture was very different in California than in Mississippi, and very different in Mississippi than in New York or Illinois. So Elazar became rather famous by making the argument that the United States really had three very distinct cultures, with many large urban states being mixes of two or more of the cultures. Now, here is my connection to Elazar. Intellectually, Elazar is my grandfather, which makes all of you, whether you are taking this class at Stanislaus or at Merced College, makes you Elazar's great grandchild. And here's how this goes. Elazar, when he was at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, had a very, very bright student. His name was Al Sokolow. Professor Sokolow was strongly influenced by Elazar, and Sokolow got a job years later at UC Davis. And then Sokolow taught me state and local government. So Elazar taught Sokolow, Sokolow taught Randall, and now I'm teaching you. So there is your direct linkage to Daniel Elazar as kind of intellectual grandfather. By political culture, and here you can follow along in the text in your notes that accompanies the first of these mini lectures. Political culture is simply distinctive ways of looking at politics. So, as I mentioned earlier, Elazar made the claim that the United States was a mix of three very distinct cultures that essentially were spread by various waves of immigration across the country. And of course, there are some states that are fairly close to pure types, although that is rapidly kind of changing as states are becoming really, in almost all cases, mixes of cultures. But certainly, there is no question that if you look throughout the country, there are certain dominant culture types within the state. The one that I want to spend the most time on is the first one for several reasons. The primary one being that the moralistic political culture is the dominant political culture in the region of the country that we live in. The moralistic culture, when I ask you on the exam, is the dominant culture of the West. Oregon was ranked by Elazar as the most moralistic culture. In the moralistic political culture, politics is seen as a good thing because it's a means to improve the community. And I would star or underline that. You're likely to see that as a potential exam question. Probably the best definition, and there are a lot of things that you see in moralistic political cultures. They tend to be more innovative. They tend to try new things. But the most defining characteristic that you usually see that is associated with the moralistic political culture is that there are usually multiple provisions for direct democracy. And certainly you see this um, in California. California is an exception in the country. There are only 11 states, and very early uh, in the exam, although the computer, I guess, mixes them up. So if I were in class, I would tell you that one of the questions that I always put on there is true or false. Most states have the initiative, referendum, and recall, and it's true or false. And the answer is false. There are only 11 states out of 50 that have all three of these mechanisms. We in California are one of the 11 states that have all three of these. 10 of the 11 are in the West, and the only non Western state that has the initiative, the referendum, and recall is the state of Michigan. So, we talked earlier about how federalism allows states to do things differently. And once again, here's an example of diversity. There are a few states, 11 of them, that have three provisions for direct democracy in their state. We are one of them. My home state of Kentucky only has one of these three. There are some states in the South that don't have any of them. You should be able to distinguish between the initiative, the referendum, and the recall if you get an exam question. The initiative many of you have participated in. The initiative is where people both propose and ratify a law, our constitutional amendment. People propose a law through signature gathering, and then the people ratify at election time. Now, the states vary a little bit. About half the states have the initiative, about half don't. And of course, the fewer the signatures that are needed to qualify a measure for the ballot, the easier it is to qualify a measure for the ballot. The greater the time frame you have to collect signatures, the easier it is to qualify a measure for the ballot. So in the state of Oregon, it is the easiest state in the country to qualify an initiative for the ballot. The state of California, if you look at the 23, I think actually just recently there might have been a 24th state, so your notes may be inaccurate. There may be 24 states now that have the initiative, but essentially we're in the middle in terms of how easy it is to qualify. Arizona's at the other end. It is more difficult to qualify a measure for the ballot in Arizona than it is in California. So the state of Oregon, our neighbor, it is easier to qualify a measure for the ballot than our state. And our other neighbor, uh, Arizona, it is more difficult to qualify a measure for the ballot. But notice, go back to that early definition that I gave you of direct democracy. In a direct democracy, people make laws themselves. There is not the direct intervention of elected representatives. And certainly you have that with the initiative. People propose the law through signature gathering, and then the people decide whether to ratify it or not. Certainly, this is not what the ancient Greeks had in mind. If you follow these things at election time, initiatives are kind of packaged often by interest groups. They're given catchy slogans, they're given names. Initiatives in California are kind of marketed like underarm deodorant or toothpaste, for example. There really isn't a meaningful discussion of the issue, and I find that kind of sad in some way. So, all right, so what do you need to know about the initiative? you should know that people both propose and ratify a law or constitutional amendment. And if you know that, you know the initiative, and you would get the exam question right if I asked an initiative question. In a referendum, it is different because what is different is who is proposing the law. In a referendum, government officials propose a law or constitutional amendment, and it is either ratified or rejected by the voters. So if you take a look at your voter's guide when it comes out, and if you see a measure that says this measure is being placed on the ballot by the California state legislature for the consideration of the voters, it's telling you right there the California state legislature placed that measure on the ballot, and therefore that is a referendum. Usually in your voter's guide, it will have what the vote was in the assembly, and I'll just make up some numbers. Let's say in this case, the assembly passed the measure 70 to 10, and the California Senate passed the measure, say, 36 to 4. So you know that both the California Assembly and Senate overwhelmingly endorsed it, but they now are placing it on the ballot for the people to consider. Many cities use the referendum often. A good example down in Southern California is Santa Monica. The city of Santa Monica, their city council will often place things on the ballot for the citizens of Santa Monica to decide on or not. So in the United States, some cities have referendum, many states have referendum, and in this case, government officials, it can be state officials, it could be local officials, but ultimately power is with the people. The people ratify both initiatives and referendums. So if you get a question, look for who's proposing it. If the people are proposing it, it's an initiative. If it's the state legislature, if it's a city council, that is a referendum. The third one, the last one, that I want to talk about in the 2.5 minutes or so that are left in this mini lecture is the recall. The recall only exists in, I believe, 15 states in the country. And a recall is where voters can remove a public official before their term expires. In California, we did something a couple decades ago or so, a little less than 2 decades ago. We did something that had only occurred one time in the history of the United States. The voters of California removed Governor Gray Davis from office. And that's how we ended up with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, as he called himself, Governor Arnold. So it was an intriguing event, very, very rare. Only 2 governors in the history of the United States have been recalled by their voters. But think about the recall. The recall is the ultimate power of the people. Through the recall, the people can remove even their most powerful elected official, which is their governor. We have had other people removed using the recall process. For example, the first woman who ever served as Speaker of the California Assembly, her name was Doris Allen. Doris Allen was removed from office by a recall. Another assemblyman, his name was Paul Horcher, was removed from office by the recall. So you should know 2 things about the recall for exam purposes. First of all, in a recall, this is where voters remove a public official before their term expires. And a question that I will ask for sure on the exam is how many governors have been recalled by the people of California? And the answer is 1. 1 governor has been recalled in California history. And if you look at the history of the United States, only 2 have. And since the recall of Gray Davis, there have been a couple of attempts in other states to recall governors, and they have failed. In the next mini lecture, I will talk about the individualistic and traditionalistic political cultures and begin looking at the Constitution and federalism. Have a great day. See you again soon.